Welcome to Resilient in Business, a podcast where we dive into insights, strategies, and systems to help you build scalable, thriving businesses. My name is Jad Atwe. I'm an engineer, an entrepreneur, and a business coach. Our intention from this show is to provide value and inspire entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoy the content, subscribe and help us spread the message. Now, let's get into today's episode. I'm very excited for today's episode. Today, I'm joined with Loretta Breuning. Loretta has a very strong and extensive background in understanding the brain, how the brain functions, and how we can wire it to our advantage. She has a number of books published on this topic. Thank you for joining us, Loretta.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about your background. For those who don't know you, is it possible to tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure. Well, I was a college professor for 20 years in a different field. Then I took early retirement to do this research that I'm doing now. What drove me to it, I would say first, when I was young, there was a lot of unhappiness around me and I was always trying to understand it. And then when I learned academic psychology, I thought that that was the answer and that would make everything okay. And needless to say, it did not. So that's why I kept researching. And when I stumbled on the animal brain, I was so amazed because to me, this seemed to explain everything. Because animals have the same brain chemicals that we have, the ones that we hear all the time that make us happy. And so if you understand how the chemicals work in animals, then to me, that explained everything.
How did the research work in this case? Are you doing experiments on animals in order to understand what goes on, or what's the process?
Sure. So I was not doing my own empirical research. Here's an amazing thing. Most of the research was done on monkeys. And in the late 90s, there was this move to prohibit monkey research and to bury all the monkey research that had already been done. And so this incredibly valuable research that I stumbled on, like how serotonin works in monkeys, how dopamine works in monkeys, it's so important and it's all ignored and I would say covered up. So that's why I was so interested in spreading it around.
And why is it important to understand the brain?
Because our emotions don't make sense to us because the brain that controls them is inherited from animals, and that part of the brain cannot talk. That part of the brain is called the limbic system. People have heard of the amygdala and the hippocampus, hypothalamus, whatever. The little parts don't matter. What matters is that all those little parts together are the same as an animal brain, and it cannot talk. The part of the brain that can talk is the part, you always see here in images, and we think that's the whole story because that does all the talking. But your talking brain does not control your emotions, and your talking brain does not control your body. Your animal limbic system controls your emotions and your body, and we have limited power over it just by talking. Why I always explain, it's like if you are riding a horse, and you can't control the horse by yelling at the horse. You can't control the horse by reciting poetry to the horse. You have to understand the horse. So that's what I think.
And based on all of this research, what's the conclusion? What should we know?
Sure. So these chemicals help you build neural pathways. So for example, when a baby is born, its neurons are not connected. This is why animals can run with the herd the day they're born, but humans take like 20 years to meet their own survival needs. And that's in modern culture. It used to be 10 years, but our neurons are not connected when we're born. And these chemicals, dopamine, cortisol, the unhappy chemical, it tells your neurons when to connect. This is the signal that this information is important. And so when a baby is hungry and someone brings it food, neurons connect because dopamine is released. And the baby doesn't know what food is, doesn't know what people are, but it knows that a good feeling comes when it's in this situation. And slowly over time, we build one neural pathway after another to make sense of the world. And the challenge, of course, is can we change those neural pathways? Because your dopamine can turn on in situations where you were happy in that moment, but really it's not good for your future. So if there's something you're doing that you don't want to do, but your dopamine pathways make it feel good, how would you change that pathway? So of course, that's what I focused on.
Amazing. This is a very important topic because many people get into habits that aren't necessarily healthy or serving them in a good way. So, and this is where changing the neural pathways becomes important. What's the process for that?
So look toward animal trainers. How do animal trainers train an animal? And it's amazing to know that in zoos, there are animals with bad habits. Like you have an animal that scratches its fur until the skin is ruined and they can't stop scratching. So what the trainer does is every time the animal would take its hand off, they would give it a treat. And that wires the brain unconsciously to take its hand off in expectation of another treat. And you can't give yourself treats all the time, but once you build the habit, then you're taking your hand off and you don't need the treats all the time. And it's so important because we've all known that feeling of like, oh, I wish I could stop scratching, but I can and I don't know why. And it's just a neural pathway. Okay? So that's more understandable with a behavior that you could see, like a person who is eating a pizza or opening a bottle of wine. But it's more complicated for a thought process. Like when a person says to themselves, poor me, everything bad happens to me. I'm just going to spend my whole life sitting on the couch because nothing I do ever works. So that's a little harder to notice, but that's really the goal is every time you stop having that thought and have a little bit of an action, get off the couch, that you reward yourself.
Yes. And through your work, through your research, is there a gentle way in order to stay on track and when we're trying to change those habits?
Yes. So the idea is that when I give this reward to this positive behavior, it takes more repetition than you would think because your verbal brain is not in charge. It's a real physical pathway. So what I say is 45 days, and you have to repeat the behavior for 45 days, and you have to give yourself extra treats on the way, depending on, if you're trying to quit smoking or have a new thought habit. I will give myself this treat every day that I follow the new plan, and this treat every week I follow the new plan, and this treat after 45 days of the new behavior straight in a row.
Interesting. So you're tricking yourself into it's like you're getting other types of dopamine hits from something else, basically, rewarding yourself. Yeah.
Very good, exactly. And dopamine is like paving on the new neural pathway that helps it to build bigger. And the electricity in the brain flows like water in a storm. It flows into the biggest pathway. So we will keep spending our whole lives flowing into the biggest pathway we have until we build a new pathway and make it bigger and bigger.
Yes. What happens to the old pathways? Is it possible to just keep them in the past, forget about them, and not revisit them in the future?
Hey, a quick commercial break. This podcast is brought to you by Business Optimization Partners, a firm that specializes in helping entrepreneurs systemize their business and transform it into a professionally managed asset that is scalable and easy to operate. If you wish to learn more, download the guide to running a professionally managed business that's available in the description. Now, back to the episode.
The old pathway will always be there, especially the pathway that was built during what I call your myelin years. Myelin is the substance that builds the biggest highways in the brain, and we have a lot of it under age 7 and during puberty because that's the time when the brain is meant to build its biggest wiring. Those pathways will always be there. So the best you could do, I talk about it if you think of it as an exit from a highway. So the highway's still there, but you build an exit. And like, let's say a person who is going to eat a whole box of cookies. And you say, I'm on that highway. I can see where this highway leads to eating the whole box of cookies. So I develop myself a plan. What should I do to get off that highway and onto another highway? And my opinion, I think this is obvious. The way to build that exit is to give yourself a different way to feel good. And that means I always use the example of listening to comedy. So when I want to eat a whole box of cookies, my plan is to listen to comedy. Now, if you listen to establishment psychology, they will tell you to, run a race and do push-ups and stuff. But that's not how our animal brain works. If you have a choice between eating cookies or doing push-ups, you're going to eat the cookies. So you have to offer yourself something that feels good in a bad moment.
Yes. And I realized some of your work revolves around building a happy brain. What does that mean and what's possible? Like, how do we do that?
Very good question. First, I'll have to tell you that title was written by the the publisher.
Yeah.
So maybe it's marketing title.
Makes sense.
My title for the self-published edition 10 years ago was Habits of, no, I did say it wrong. My title was Meet Your Happy Chemicals. So the idea was more intellectual, to understand your happy chemicals. And when you understand them, you know that they are not meant to be on all the time. They only turn on in short spurts. For example, when a monkey is hungry, it looks for food. When it sees food in the distance, it gets a little bit of dopamine, and that motivates it to go toward the food. And it gets more and more dopamine when it gets closer. And then when the monkey grabs the food, the dopamine stops because it has already done its job. So if people expect to just be happy all the time, they're not going to have it. And if people think other people are getting happy chemicals all the time, then they feel left out and broken. And this is the message that establishment psychology is selling, and I think it's very harmful.
Yeah. You mentioned it takes 45 days to establish a new pathway. Is this based on research or is it just double the 21 days other people talk about?
Yeah, good question. So I got it from a yoga teacher who insisted that there were studies. And then when I looked for the studies, I couldn't find them. So then I took back the 45 days in the next book. And then people complained. People liked the 45 days because the simple way to say it, that your goal is to do it the rest of your life, not to do it for 21 days and to stop. So the point is that every day you do it, it gets easier. But maybe after 21 days, you may say, oh, now that's done. I want to go back to doing my old way. And now I feel like I accomplished something. But the idea is to do it until the pathway is big enough that it feels normal. So that's your goal. And I guess individuals have to judge it. And another way of saying it is, I think people need to tackle one habit at a time. So for example, if a person, let's just say, for example, they come home from work, they drink a bottle of wine and they have negative thoughts. So they may need to tackle, one chunk at a time, like maybe first build a habit of having a positive thought, and then build a habit of having only one glass of wine. Experiment with different habits.
Yes. So this podcast is called Resilient in Business. I'm curious, in your work, what do you feel contributes to being more resilient?
Sure. So we need to understand the threat chemical that's always, very close to the surface. The threat chemical people have heard of is cortisol. It's often called the stress chemical, but it makes you feel like you're going to die. That's its job. So when an animal smells a predator, the animal runs in order to save its life. And the animal would rather keep eating rather than run. So cortisol has to feel very bad in order to motivate the animal to run when it's hungry. So we have cortisol that is turned on by very small things, even though we're not about to die or get killed from a predator. So a simple answer would be, if I have hope of a big contract in my business and then I don't get it, my cortisol turns on and it feels life-threatening. Even though your verbal brain doesn't say that it's life-threatening, it's a whole body feeling of like something terrible is going to happen to me. And this is a natural thing. It's not a disorder. This is how our brain works. So I explain it from an animal perspective. Imagine you're a lion, and if you watch nature videos, you see that lions have a hard time getting food. Sometimes they go for a whole week without getting food, and they're running after prey, and the prey gets away. So imagine how bad the lion feels, like you're so close to getting that food, and then it gets away, and you haven't eaten for a whole week. So cortisol turns on, and you feel terrible. But that cortisol has a very valuable job. The cortisol tells the lion to stop running, so it's not wasting any more energy on a path that failed. Okay, so that's the job of cortisol, is to let you know not to waste your energy on a path that is not working. And another famous example is if you have a romantic interest in someone and they don't like you back. And that feels terrible because that is nature's way to say, if you waste your energy on this hopeless endeavor, your genes will not survive. And that's how the brain is designed to work.
Yes. Is there ways that you find it's better to manage stress, manage uncertainty? What's the workaround in order to make sure that we control our brain and are on the right path?
Sure. Of course, there's no easy answer because entrepreneurship is a difficult challenge and there's no certainty. Some people are in a situation where they actually do face survival threats. For example, like let's say you're close to bankruptcy or something, and some people are not and just feeling it. So first, I would suggest to differentiate between the two, because I know that like if you basically are in a safe financial position, but you've just suffered a disappointing loss, it feels just as bad as if you were about to go hungry and your children would go hungry. So first, to differentiate between the two. So the second thing is social comparison. This is how the brain works, is it compares what you are doing to what others are doing. Animals do this all the time. And I don't know how much time we have left. It's like I wrote 2 books about this, and it's really important to know how motivated we are by social comparison. So if your business is growing by 5%, but your friend's business is growing by 10%, your cortisol may turn on and make you feel like you're doing terribly, even though you're doing fine. So that's the next thing. Okay. But finally, let's just say in the situation where if your brain really is if your business really is doing badly and you are facing a real serious threat. So whatever threatened feelings you have are always using neural pathways built by your childhood experience. So even though you could say, yes, it's a real threat, but any threat you felt when you were young is what you are turning on now. So maybe your father had money problems. Maybe other kids in school laughed at you for something. Every time your cortisol is turned on, you are using your cortisol pathways myelinated in before age 8 and during adolescence. And that is making it worse than it needs to be.
Yeah. I think we have time. Tell us more about social comparison.
Good. Okay. So it's hard to believe that animals are comparing themselves to others all the time because we're told that that's an evil caused by our society and all this social pressure. And in the state of nature, they all have peace and love and equality. It's totally not true. And again, this is what got me on this whole project. So I'll give you the link to my reading list with all the books that I read on animal studies showing me that animals drive themselves crazy over social comparison because the ones that rise in the hierarchy get the mating opportunity and the food. And now academic psychology is telling us that animals share food and they party and they just love everyone. It's totally not true. So the link for those books is innermammalinstitute.org/reading list. Reading list, all one word. So, and my books on this subject are on that list. One is called Status Games, Why We Play and How to Stop. And the other is called I Mammal, How to Make Peace with the Mammalian Urge for Social Power. So the bottom line is when you rise in the status hierarchy, however you defined it in your childhood, your brain rewards you with serotonin. When you see yourself in the one-up position in anything, you get a little burst of serotonin, just a little. So it's like having a little win. But when you have a one down position, even a small one, you get a little bit of cortisol and you feel bad. So a simple example is that you're playing cards. When you draw the card and get the card you need and you win that game, you feel good. When you lose that game, you feel bad. And so these are natural impulses, even though the cards don't really matter, even if you're not gambling. So that's the natural impulse, even for people who say, oh, I don't care about these things. I just want to help the world. I just want my children to have a better life. No, you care with all of that animal energy that you have. So if you are pushing it onto other people or your children, that's nice with your verbal brain, but it doesn't relieve your feelings. And it may even hurt your children, you know? It may give your children maybe false illusions about life. So the first step is to notice your own social comparisons because you may believe that society is forcing this on you without seeing that you're doing it yourself. And then the second one is to find the roots of where they come from. So for some people, their parents pushed them very hard because their parents had bad feelings about their own life. But for many people, it's the opposite, that their parents gave them negative expectations and they want to prove that their parents were wrong. For some people, they have a sibling or a cousin who's always doing better than them, and their mother always reminds them of the person who's doing better than them, you know? So everyone needs to find their own unique thing that's driving them.
Absolutely. How do you support people? What's the process of that you yeah? If someone, let's say, when do they realize that they need the Loretta help, and how do you support them?
Thank you. My website, innermammalinstitute.org/coaching. So that's my coaching page, and I'd be happy to work with you. It's short term. It's not like therapy where it's long term, but it's just 1 to 3 sessions, your choice. You don't have to commit to, and I will help you drill down and find those early childhood circuits that are real physical pathways that are turning on your serotonin, dopamine, and controlling what you get excited about or what you get upset about. And then, more important, helping you design the new pathway that you'd like to have and how you could reward yourself for building that.
What are some success stories or previous client stories that you've worked with, just to give us an idea of what people go through and how they transform?
Sure. So it's amazing of how broad the patterns are. Like I had one person who her parents were not very responsible, let's say, and they sort of relied on her to run the whole family. And as often happens in this case, that person develops a sense of strength and then ends up being effective in adulthood. But then when these people start making their own choices, then she gets upset. She can't control them anymore. It was a nephew who, like her sibling, who was very passive, just like the parents, and she controlled his whole life. But then his child became a teenager and didn't want her to control him. And she was like all upset, even though, she had a good life, but that broke her childhood pattern of I must control all these people. And it's not just controlling for her own power, although she did admit that, which I was amazed. Even just reading my book, she was able to be honest about that. But then it's more than just admitting that it's for my own power, because my early childhood experience was if I don't control everything, we're going to die. Because that's what cortisol does. It makes you feel like I'm going to die unless this certain thing happens. Because that's what it's like for a child. When something goes wrong, cortisol turns on and they feel like it's a life or death situation. And whatever cure they find, they do that. I had another person who, oh God, it's just amazing that how everybody reproduces their childhood situation in adulthood. So I had a guy who, it sounds like a cliche, but, in a relationship with a woman who was sort of like his mother. In this case, it was not really there. The mother was not really there. And the person was and so he's living in a different state from his partner. And he was like wanting to start another business and another because it distracts him from this person who he can't control and these emotions that he can't control. Then there was another person whose family drama always was in the context of money. And long story short, the mother was still alive, but they were fighting over the will. And the mother was like feeding this, like kept changing her will and re-perpetuating. Like I tried this one. I don't know if I got through to this person, but her whole life was around, it's not fair because I'm doing more than my siblings and I'm not getting enough credit for it. And you could see how a person can bring that mindset into the workplace. It's not fair. I'm doing more than other people and not getting credit. It's a very deep thing. And she just kept going back to that. And she said, but it's not fair. I'd say, but, can you imagine being happy even, regardless of what happens with your mother and your brother? She'd say, but it's not fair.
Yeah, they're stuck in the past because this is what they know, I guess.
They're stuck in the past because it's a real physical pathway and it's so big, and people don't realize that that pathway was actually making them happy in the past because it was a way to fight back against whatever worse thing was happening.
Yes, thank you, Loretta. This was very helpful. We try to end this podcast on a positive note. What are you looking forward to in the future? What are you excited about? Is there a new book coming up? I realized that you have a bunch of them.
Yeah, so I'm working on a couple of new books. So first, I just put out my first novel. It's called The Jane Goodall of Goats. And I wrote a novel to make this fun, and also because the research on chimpanzees is so far away and goats are something that's more accessible to people, and they have the same bad behavior. And now many people have asked me to write a book for teenagers. So I'm working on that. And I'm working on a book on herd behavior because the political partisanship, around the world is so intense that, again, I don't know if I'll succeed at getting through to anybody, but I still want to write it.
This was very insightful. It's very important to understand how our brain works just to increase our self-awareness and understand those patterns that are happening with us in life. Thank you for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for the great questions.
Thanks for tuning into the Resilient in Business podcast. This show is all about providing valuable insights and inspiring entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward no matter the challenges. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and help us spread the message. See you on the next one.